Well, hello. This is my first screencast, and I'm going to start it on Chapter 4, Population Dynamics. There's a couple of things here that I think might need some extra explanation while you're at home. So it would be best if you were to get your book out and go to page 91 and follow along with me. That's the page I'm on right now. By the way, if my head over here is in the way, you can feel free to pick me up and drag me to somewhere else. Or I don't know if you can probably just get rid of it altogether if you like. Okay, I'm going to move along straight to this chart right here. This chart is called a J-curve. It's a line graph showing how a population starts out small and then grows exponentially. Because at the beginning there's just a few individuals with which to reproduce, and then as they reproduce and double themselves, you get a doubling and a doubling and a doubling and exponential growth. And it looks like the letter J. At some point, though, all populations have to reach what's called carrying capacity. Carrying capacity is when limiting factors, now that's a term from last chapter, these are things that check a population's growth, such as disease, living space, predators, availability of food, and just simple competition from others of your same species. At some point, population will grow large enough to where it has to level off, where those limiting factors will become too strong and the population cannot simply grow indefinitely. Question I have is, what is the carrying capacity for humans on this planet? And that's something we're going to get into next chapter. Anyhow, so if you look here, a J-curve eventually turns into what's called an S-curve as you get a level off here because of those various limiting factors I mentioned before. Now, as I go into the next page here, when a species reaches carrying capacity, if you look at this graph right here, it shows it rising above it, dipping below, above and below, and yeah, that's likely what would happen. And this carrying capacity line, can that move? Well, humans can make it move. We can make more food available. We can limit disease, things like that. However, even with all of our technology, at some point, there will have to be a level off. Every species is going to have one. A couple other terms here. Rapid and slow life histories. Some organisms reproduce very quickly, like many plants here will reproduce very fast. Their numbers bounce back very quickly. Same as deer. Some organisms have kind of a random pattern. They're kind of spread out in no particular pattern. Some organisms are clumped like this, and some organisms have a very uniform pattern such as this, likely because they're drawing resources from all around them, preventing anything else from growing. So there's a very regular space in between them. Other things that determine limiting factors would be how closely they live together. Density-dependent factors, such as disease and living space. These things can affect how a population grows. If organisms are tightly packed together, disease will spread more quickly. Density-independent factors are going to be things factors that limit a population regardless of how closely they live together, such as volcanic eruptions, temperature, storms, floods, drought, pesticides, habitat disruption, and whatnot. Predators, obviously, if you look at this chart right here, here is lynx and its prey, the hare. And you can see they're very related. When one goes up, the other one goes up. When one goes down, the other one goes down. As the lynx population goes up, it puts more pressure on the hares, which forces their population down. As the hare population goes up, that means there's more for the lynx to eat, and their population goes up. Overcrowding can be a factor as well. It can even create aggression and a decrease in parental care, decreased fertility, decreased resistance to diseases, things like that. These are baby rats right here. Okay, well, thank you for watching my first screencast. I will have more. Hello, this is my first screencast, so bear along with me here. I'm going to go over some of the concepts of section 4.1 on population dynamics. Here I have the book pulled up online just like you're able to do. So I would do the same thing, have that in the background here. All right, a couple of the concepts that I want to go over is The main one is these two graphs you're going to see. One's called a J curve. It's going to be called an S curve, and we'll get to that in just a second here. A J curve is where you have a few individuals that start a population, and as you can see, they start out very slowly, but as they start to replace themselves and double themselves, and then they double themselves, you get an exponential kind of growth here. And it looks like the letter J. However, this growth cannot continue unchecked because there are limiting factors, which is a term from the last chapter. Limiting factors will check the growth, things such as disease, living space, possible predators, availability of food, and simple competition from members of your own species will limit your population. And what happens is that a J curve will level off and become what's called an S curve when the population reaches what's called carrying capacity. When wherever that ecosystem is, it's holding as many of that species as it can. And of course, these limiting factors here play a part into that. So the question is where is human carrying capacity going to be? Right now, we are still in our J-curve phase. Eventually, human population will have to level off. We're going to talk more about that in the next section. As I scroll through here, a couple of these ideas about life histories. Oops, hold on. Some organisms have what we call a fast life history. Some have a slow life history. A slow life history would be like a humpback whale. The mothers are pregnant for over a year. Blue whales are pregnant for almost 2 years, and they only have one calf at a time. So when you have overhunting, such as the whaling that went on during most of the last century, those numbers can't really bounce back very well, and some of these were hunted to near extinction. Moratoriums on whaling have helped their numbers bounce back, although some are still whaling. If you look here, here's another graph showing how carrying capacity works. Once a species goes above the carrying capacity, there has to be a die-off, and then it may bounce back and forth up and below the carrying capacity line, but it'll stay pretty much near that. Can carrying capacity be changed? Well, humans, we can change our carrying capacity. We can find ways to grow more food. We have vaccinations for diseases and whatnot. So we're constantly upping our carrying capacity, but at some point it will catch up with us. We can't use technology to hold that off forever. Some organisms have very fast life history patterns. For example, these mustard plants here and deer, they have a lot at one time, and they have very short gestation periods, and so their numbers do bounce back, and so overhunting isn't really a problem. Some organisms live in a very random pattern like this. There appears to be no particular pattern, where some tend to be clumped together, and then some organisms tend to be uniformly spread apart, such as these pine trees here. If you look here, there is almost the exact distance between all of them, and that is likely due to the pine trees soaking up all the nutrients within a small radius around the trunk of their tree, which prevents any other trees from growing in that area. Some other terms from this chapter here: density-dependent and density-independent factors. A density-dependent factor is a limiting factor that is dependent upon how closely the organisms live together. For example, if you have a lot of organisms that live in very tight, close communities, disease is going to spread much more quickly, which will, of course, limit their population. Then there are things that limit populations that are density independent, meaning that it doesn't really matter how closely they're living together. It will still affect populations such as volcanic eruptions, temperature, storms, flood, drought, chemical pesticides, and whatnot. Availability of food is probably the largest one, the most important limiting factor. If you look here at this graph, we have the lynx and its prey, the hare. The more hares that are available, the more lynx that will follow. You see that the hare population, when the hare population goes up, the lynx population follows it upward. When the hare population goes down, the lynx population goes down. So the predator is completely dependent upon the prey, and the availability of prey will determine what the numbers are of their predator. Here you see an example of overcrowding and the stress that it can place on the individuals when you have organisms that are overcrowding, which would definitely be a density dependent factor. You get things like increased aggression, decreased parental care, decreased fertility, decreased resistance to diseases. These are baby rats here. And here you have a bunch of mice or rats growing in a very crowded cage. And of course, they're going to be wasting in that cage and contaminating possible food and making each other sick. So that's a very strong density dependent factor. Okay, that's it for section 1. Thank you.